What could be the reason then of this curious disparity, I wondered, drawing cartwheels on the slips of paper provided by the British taxpayer for other purposes? Why are women, judging from this catalogue, so much more interesting to men than men are to women? A very curious fact, it seemed, and my mind wandered to picture the lives of men who spend their time in writing books about women, whether they were old or young, married or unmarried, red-nosed or humpbacked. Anyhow, it was flattering vaguely to feel oneself the object of such attention, provided that it was not entirely bestowed by the crippled and the infirm. So I pondered until all such frivolous thoughts were ended by an avalanche of books sliding down on the desk in front of me. Now the trouble began. The student who has been trained in research at Oxbridge has no doubt some method of shepherding his question past all distractions till it runs into its answer as a sheep runs into its pen. The student by my side, for instance, who was copying assiduously from a scientific manual was, I felt sure, extracting pure nuggets of the essential ore every 10 minutes or so. His little grunts of satisfaction indicated so much. But if, unfortunately, one has had no training in a university, the question, far from being shepherded to its pen, flies like a frightened flock hither and thither, helter-skelter, pursued by a whole pack of hounds, professors, schoolmasters, sociologists, clergymen, novelists, essayists, journalists, men who had no qualifications save they were not women, chased my simple and single question. Why are women poor? Until it became 50 questions, until the 50 questions leapt frantically into midstream and were carried away. Every page in my notebook was scribbled over with notes. To show the state of mind I was in, I will read you a few of them, explaining that the page was headed quite simply, Women in Poverty, in block letters. But what followed was something like this. Condition in Middle Ages of habits in the Fiji Islands of worshipped as goddesses by a weaker in moral sense than, idealism of, greater conscientiousness of, South Sea Islanders, age of puberty among, attractiveness of, offered as sacrifice to small size of brain of, profounder subconsciousness of, less hair on the body of, mental, moral, and physical inferiority of, love of children of, greater length of life of, weaker muscles of, strength of affections of, vanity of, higher education of, Shakespeare's opinion of, Lord Birkenhead's opinion of, Dean Inge's opinion of, La Bruyère's opinion of, Dr. Johnson's opinion of, Mr. Oscar Browning's opinion of. Here I drew breath and added, indeed, in the margin, why does Samuel Butler say wise men never say what they think of women? Wise men never say anything else, apparently. But I continued, leaning back in my chair and looking at the vast dome in which I was a single but by now somewhat harassed thought. But I continued, leaning back in my chair and looking at the vast dome in which I was a single but by now somewhat harassed thought. What is so unfortunate is that wise men never think the same thing about women. Here is Pope. Most women have no character at all. And here is La Bruyère. Les femmes sont extrêmes, elles sont mieux, ou pires que les hommes. A direct contradiction by keen observers who were contemporary. Are they capable of education or incapable? Napoleon thought them incapable. Dr. Johnson thought the opposite. Quote, men know that women are an overmatch for them and therefore they choose the weakest or the most ignorant. If they did not think so, they never could be afraid of women knowing as much as themselves. In justice to the sex, I think it but candid to acknowledge that in a subsequent conversation, he told me that he was serious in what he said. End of quote. Boswell, The Journal of a Tour to the Hebrides. Have they souls or have they not souls? Some savages say they have none. Others, on the contrary, maintain that women are half divine and worship them on that account. Quote, the ancient Germans believed that there was something holy in women and accordingly consulted them as oracles, end of quote. Fraser, Golden Bough. Some sages hold that they are shallower in the brain, others that they are deeper in the consciousness. Goethe honored them, Mussolini despises them. Wherever one looked, men thought about women and thought differently. It was impossible to make head or tail of it all. I decided, glancing with envy at the reader next door who was making the neatest abstracts headed often with an A or a B or a C, while my own notebook rioted with the wildest scribble of contradictory jottings. It was distressing, it was bewildering, it was humiliating. Truth had run through my fingers. Every drop had escaped. I could not possibly go home, I reflected, and add as a serious contribution to the study of women in fiction that women have less hair on their bodies than men, or that the age of puberty among the South Sea Islanders is 9, or is it 90? Even the handwriting had become in its distraction indecipherable. It was disgraceful to have nothing more weighty or respectable to show after a whole morning's work. And if I could not grasp the truth about W, as for brevity's sake I had come to call her, in the past, why bother about W in the future? It seemed pure waste of time to consult all those gentlemen who specialize in woman and her effect on whatever it may be, politics, children, wages, morality. Numerous and learned as they are, one might as well leave their books unopened. But while I pondered, I had unconsciously in my listlessness and my desperation been drawing a picture where I should, like my neighbor, have been writing a conclusion. I had been drawing a face, a figure. It was the face and the figure of Professor von X, engaged in writing his monumental work entitled The Mental, Moral, and Physical Inferiority of the Female Sex. He was not in my picture a man attractive to women. He was heavily built. He had a great jowl. To balance that, he had very small eyes. He was very red in the face. His expression suggested that he was laboring under some emotion that made him jab his pen on the paper as if he were killing some noxious insect as he wrote. But even when he had killed it, that did not satisfy him. He must go on killing it, and even so, some cause for anger and irritation remained. Could it be his wife, I asked, looking at my picture. Was she in love with a cavalry officer? Was the cavalry officer slim and elegant and dressed in astrakhan? Had he been laughed at, to adopt the Freudian theory, in his cradle by a pretty girl? For even in his cradle, the professor, I thought, could not have been an attractive child. Whatever the reason, the professor was made to look very angry and very ugly in my sketch as he wrote his great book upon the mental, moral, and physical inferiority of women. Drawing pictures was an idle way of finishing an unprofitable morning's work. Yet it is in our idleness, in our dreams, that the submerged truth sometimes comes to the top. A very elementary exercise in psychology, not to be dignified by the name of psychoanalysis, showed me on looking at my notebook that the sketch of the angry professor had been made in anger. Anger had snatched my pencil while I dreamt. But what was anger doing there? Interest, confusion, amusement, boredom, all these emotions I could trace and name as they succeeded each other throughout the morning. Had anger, the black snake, been lurking among them? Yes, said the sketch, anger had. It referred me unmistakably to the one book, to the one phrase which had roused the demon. It was the professor's statement about the mental, moral, and physical inferiority of women. My heart had leapt, my cheeks had burnt, I had flushed with anger. There was nothing specially remarkable, however foolish, in that. One does not like to be told that one is naturally the inferior of a little man. I looked at the student next to me, who breathes hard, wears a ready-made tie, and has not shaved this fortnight. One has certain foolish vanities. It is only human nature, I reflected, and began drawing cartwheels and circles over the angry professor's face till he looked like a burning bush or a flaming comet anyhow. An apparition without human semblance or significance. The professor was nothing now but a faggot burning on the top of Hampstead Heath. Soon my own anger was explained and done with. But curiosity remained. How explain the anger of the professors? Why were they angry? For when it came to analyzing the impression left by these books, there was always an element of heat. This heat took many forms. It showed itself in satire and sentiment and curiosity and reprobation. But there was another element which was often present and could not immediately be identified. Anger, I called it. But it was anger that had gone underground and mixed itself with all kinds of other emotions. To judge from its odd effects, it was anger disguised and complex, not anger simple and open. Whatever the reason, all these books, I thought, surveying the pile on the desk, are worthless for my purposes. They were worthless scientifically, that is to say, though humanly they were full of instruction, interest, boredom, and very queer facts about the habits of the Fiji Islanders. They had been written in the red light of emotion and not in the white light of truth. Therefore, they must be returned to the central desk and restored each to his own cell in the enormous honeycomb. All that I had retrieved from that morning's work had been the one fact of anger. The professors, I lumped them together thus, were angry. But why, I asked myself, having returned the books, why, I repeated, standing under the colonnade among the pigeons and the prehistoric canoes, why are they angry? And asking myself this question, I strolled off to find a place for luncheon. What is the real nature of what I call for the moment their anger, I asked. Here was a puzzle that would last all the time that it takes to be served with food in a small restaurant somewhere near the British Museum. Some previous luncher had left the lunch edition of the evening paper on a chair, and waiting to be served, I began idly reading the headlines. A ribbon of very large letters ran across the page. Somebody had made a big score in South Africa. Lesser ribbons announced that Sir Austen Chamberlain was at Geneva. A meat axe with human hair on it had been found in a cellar. Mr. Justice blank commented in the divorce courts upon the shamelessness of women. Sprinkled about the paper were other pieces of news. A film actress had been lowered from a peak in California and hung suspended in midair. The weather was going to be foggy. The most transient visitor to this planet, I thought, who picked up this paper could not fail to be aware, even from this scattered testimony, that England is under the rule of a patriarchy. Nobody in their senses could fail to detect the dominance of the professor. His was the power and the money and the influence. His was the proprietor of the paper and its editor and sub-editor. He was the foreign secretary and the judge. He was the cricketer. He owned the racehorses and the yachts. He was the director of the company that pays 200% to its shareholders. He left millions to charities and colleges that were ruled by himself. He suspended the film actress in midair. He will decide if the hair on the meat axe is human. He it is who will acquit or convict the murderer and hang him or let him go free. With the exception of the fog, he seemed to control everything. Yet he was angry. I knew that he was angry by this token. When I read what he wrote about women, I thought not of what he was saying, but of himself. When an arguer argues dispassionately, he thinks only of the argument. And the reader cannot help thinking of the argument too. If he had written dispassionately about women, had used indisputable proofs to establish his argument, and had shown no trace of wishing that the result should be one thing rather than another, one would not have been angry either. One would have accepted the fact as one accepts the fact that a pea is green or a canary yellow. So be it, I should have said. But I had been angry because he was angry, yet it seemed absurd, I thought, turning over the evening paper, that a man with all this power should be angry. Or is anger, I wondered somehow, the familiar, the attendant sprite on power? Rich people, for example, are often angry because they suspect that the poor want to seize their wealth. The professors, or patriarchs as it might be more accurate to call them, might be angry for that reason partly, but partly for one that lies a little less obviously on the surface. Possibly they were not angry at all. Often, indeed, they were admiring, devoted, exemplary in the relations of private life. Possibly when the professor insisted a little too emphatically upon the inferiority of women, he was concerned not with their inferiority, but with his own superiority. That was what he was protecting rather hot-headedly and with too much emphasis, because it was a jewel to him of the rarest price. Life for both sexes, and I looked at them shouldering their way along the pavement, is arduous, difficult, a perpetual struggle. It calls for gigantic courage and strength, more than anything perhaps, creatures of illusion as we are. It calls for confidence in oneself. Without self-confidence, we are as babes in the cradle. And how can we generate this imponderable quality, which is yet so invaluable, most quickly? By thinking that other people are inferior to oneself. By feeling that one has some innate superiority. It may be wealth or rank, a straight nose, or the portrait of a grandfather by Romney, for there is no end to the pathetic devices of the human imagination over other people. Hence the enormous importance to a patriarch who has to conquer, who has to rule, of feeling that great numbers of people, half the human race indeed, are by nature inferior to himself. It must indeed be one of the chief sources of his power, but let me turn the light of this observation onto real life, I thought. Does it help to explain some of those psychological puzzles that one notes in the margin of daily life? Does it explain my astonishment the other day when Z, most humane, most modest of men, taking up some book by Rebecca West and reading a passage in it, exclaimed, The errant feminist. She says that men are snobs. The exclamation to me, so surprising, for why was Miss West an errant feminist for making a possibly true, if uncomplimentary, statement about the other sex, was not merely the cry of wounded vanity, it was a protest against some infringement of his power to believe in himself. Women have served all these centuries as looking glasses possessing the magic and delicious power of reflecting the figure of man at twice its natural size. Without that power, probably the earth would still be swamp and jungle. The glories of all our wars would be unknown. We should still be scratching the outlines of deer on the remains of mutton bones and bartering flints for sheepskins or whatever simple ornament took our unsophisticated taste. Supermen and fingers of destiny would never have existed. The Tsar and the Kaiser would never have worn their crowns or lost them. Whatever may be their use in civilized societies, mirrors are essential to all violent and heroic action. Mirrors are essential to all violent and heroic action. That is why Napoleon and Mussolini both insist so emphatically upon the inferiority of women, for if they were not inferior, they would cease to enlarge. That serves to explain in part the necessity that women so often are to men, and it serves to explain how restless they are under her criticism, how impossible it is for her to say to them, this book is bad, this picture is feeble, or whatever it may be, without giving far more pain and rousing far more anger than a man would do who gave the same criticism. For if she begins to tell the truth, the figure in the looking glass shrinks, his fitness for life is diminished. How is he to go on giving judgments, civilizing natives, making laws, writing books, dressing up and speechifying at banquets, unless he can see himself at breakfast and at dinner at least twice the size he really is? So I reflected, crumbling my bread and stirring my coffee, and now and again looking at the people in the street. The looking glass vision is of supreme importance because it charges the vitality, it stimulates the nervous system. Take it away and man may die like the drug fiend deprived of his cocaine. Under the spell of that illusion, I thought, looking out of the window, half the people on the pavement are striding to work. They put on their hats and coats in the morning under its agreeable rays. They start the day confident, braced, believing themselves desired at Miss Smith's tea party. They say to themselves as they go into the room, I am the superior of half of the people here, and it is thus that they speak with that self-confidence, that self-assurance which have had such profound consequences in public life and lead to such curious notes in the margin of the private mind. But these contributions to the dangerous and fascinating subject of the psychology of the other sex, it is one I hope that you will investigate when you have 500 a year of your own, were interrupted by the necessity of paying the bill. It came to 5 shillings and 9 pence. I gave the waiter a 10-shilling note, and he went to bring me change. There was another 10-shilling note in my purse. I noticed it because it is a fact that still takes my breath away, the power of my purse to breed 10-shilling notes automatically. I open it, and there they are. Society gives me chicken and coffee, bed and lodging in return for a certain number of pieces of paper, which were left me by my aunt, for no other reason than that I share her name. My aunt, Mary Betton, I must tell you, died by a fall from her horse when she was riding out to take the air in Bombay. The news of my legacy reached me one night about the same time that the act was passed that gave votes to women. A solicitor's letter fell into the post box, and when I opened it, I found that she had left me £500 a year forever. Of the two, the vote and the money I own seemed infinitely the more important. Before that, I had made my living by cadging odd jobs from newspapers, by reporting a donkey show here or a wedding there. I had earned a few pounds by addressing envelopes, reading to old ladies, making artificial flowers, teaching the alphabet to small children in a kindergarten. Such were the chief occupations that were open to women before 1918. I need not, I am afraid, describe in any detail the hardness of the work, for you know perhaps women who have done it, nor the difficulty of living on the money when it was earned for you may have tried. But that still remains with me. But what still remains with me as a worse infliction than either was the poison of fear and bitterness which those days bred in me. To begin with, always to be doing work that one did not wish to do, and to do it like a slave, flattering and fawning, not always necessarily perhaps, but it seemed necessary, and the stakes were too great to run risks. And then the thought of that one gift which it was death to hide, a small one but dear to the possessor, perishing, and with it myself, my soul, all this became like a rust, eating away the bloom of the spring, destroying the tree at its heart. However, as I say, my aunt died, and whenever I change a 10-shilling note, a little of that rust and corrosion is rubbed off. Fear and bitterness go. Indeed, I thought, slipping the silver into my purse, it is remarkable, remembering the bitterness of those days, what a change of temper a fixed income will bring about. No force in the world can take from me my £500. Food, house, and clothing are mine forever. Therefore, not merely do effort and labor cease, but also hatred and bitterness.